Hello, and welcome to HHH, the podcast where we talk about those horrible humans in history. I am your host, Angela Pearson, and if you are new to this channel, welcome. We are so excited to have you here. Hopefully, you enjoyed the spooky, scary stories of horrible people from our past. If you have been with us for a while or ever since the beginning, thank you so much for hanging on with me. I just do these podcasts for funsies, and just so you guys know, I know it's been a hot minute, but I have had this episode ready to record for a couple weeks now, but every night that I was going to record, we had a concert for our kids, or as last week, I was sick, so things have come up. So in light of all of that, make sure you are liking and subscribing and hitting the notification button, because life gets crazy here. And sometimes, because I do this podcast for fun, it does take a back seat, but I want to be consistent. I will always post another episode. So make sure you're hitting the notification button on whatever platform you listen to the podcast with, so you can be notified anytime I post a new episode. Hopefully, as the school year finishes up, we will be able to be more consistent with posting episodes. So thank you all for sticking with me. Thanks for holding on. And also, I love hearing any suggestions that you might have. I have a couple lined up already of suggestions from some of our listeners that if you want to hear about a horrible human in history, let me know. I want to talk about who you guys want to talk or listen to about. So please send them my way. And today's episode is actually a recommendation. Thanks again to Ethan Ackerman for the recommendation. I will always give you a shout out if you give me the recommendation. And Ethan suggested today. So I'm excited so much to talk about this person, because I had no idea this individual existed. So this was a fantastic recommendation. So thanks again for this awesome recommendation. So today's story is one of the most shocking and morally complicated cases we've talked about. Because have you ever heard of the show Dexter? I personally have never watched it. I've heard of it. But if you have never heard of it, it's about basically a serial killer who kills bad guys, right? After this episode, I may have to go watch this show, because today's episode has kind of a similar storyline. It's a man killing criminals, except this story is real. So we're talking about a man who claimed to have killed over 100 people. Yeah, 100 people. A man who targeted criminals, and some people called him a vigilante, but others called him a serial killer. So this is the story of Pedro Rodrigues Filho, better known as Pedrinho Matador, Brazil's most notorious serial killer. So we are going to go into his life because, like I said, he supposedly has killed over 100 people. So let's get into this. So let's go back in time, way back to October 29th, 1954, when Pedro Rodrigues Filho was born in a tiny farm town of Santa Rita do Sapucia, which is in Brazil. So Pedro Rodrigues Filho entered the world that was already marked, literally. His father, in one of his many drunken rages, actually kicked his pregnant wife, so the mother of Pedro Rodrigues, while Pedro Rodrigues Filho was still in his mother. He got kicked by his drunk father so hard that Pedro was born with an actual dent in his skull. It was a bruised skull. So violence was literally baked into him from day one. Now, Pedro's story begins in violence, like I said, even before he was born. And it's said that his father was very abusive, brutally beating his mom during many arguments. And there's some speculations that this actually contributed to neurological or behavioral issues that led to his later violent tendencies, though we don't actually have any medically confirmed anything to support that. It's just really impossible to prove that, but a lot of people speculate that that is part of why he becomes what he becomes. Now, at this time, the area that he was born into was very poor. It was a poor agricultural area marked by very limited access to education and social services. It was a place where violence, especially domestic violence, like what happened between his mother and father, was very often underreported or just blatantly ignored. So he grew up on farms in working class conditions, surrounded by really rough, basically survival-based lifestyles. So Pedro's childhood was dominated by violence. I mean, literally from the time he was born. His father was known to be very physically abusive, particularly towards Pedro's mother. And alcohol and aggression were very common in the household, which left the home very lacking in stability, safety, and emotional support. So it wasn't a very great home environment for him. And like I said, from a very early age, Pedro was exposed to physical violence and unpredictable anger and a lack of an authority figure that he could trust. And that's actually really important to his story, that lack of authority figures that were trustworthy. Now, thanks to that kind of upbringing, it really leads to a sense of desensitization towards violence. And specifically in Pedro's case, it actually seems to have normalized it for him. So violence was just a normal part of life, which, newsflash, that is not a normal part of life. So if you're experiencing any kind of domestic violence or anything, that is not normal. And I recommend you get help because you deserve better. Anyways, that's my little soapbox, throwing that in there. Pedro was the oldest of several kids on a poor farm. By the age of 10, he was already working, so he was fishing or doing whatever it took, including killing feral monkeys. That was one of his jobs, was killing feral monkeys for their pellets and their meat, just to help feed his siblings. So that's a fun job. And as far as schooling goes, it was spotty at best. And that alone tells us something. He had very, very minimal schooling, likely only a couple of years based on like a very, very basic education. He did not pursue or complete any kind of advanced degrees ever. And he likely dropped out early or became a disengaged student very, very quickly. And in rural Brazil at the time, especially in poor families, education most of the time came secondary to work, and the children were expected to contribute to the family home. Like, children were supposed to earn money to help sustain the home. So Pedro likely spent more time working and wandering around looking for work than he ever spent in a classroom. Now, even before his teenage years, Pedro reportedly showed some very troubling traits. He had a very quick temper and had difficulty controlling his anger. He also had a tendency toward violent retaliation rather than avoidance, and he had very little empathy for others. So a really great recipe for a very patient, kind, and caring individual. So he already was showing the tendencies of defaulting to violence and revenge, which is, I guess, the theme of his adult life, you could say. However, these traits, by the way, didn't mean he was seen or viewed as a future killer by everyone. More like a volatile, aggressive kid who was used to a violent environment. So no one saw these traits in him as a red flag that he would turn into a killer, because it was just common in this area to experience violence. So no one thought like, ooh, maybe we should watch out for this kid. Maybe he's going to turn into a serial killer. No, everyone was just like, oh yeah, violence is normal. He's just used to it. It's fine. Move on. Now, this distinction is really important. He wasn't an outlier in a peaceful setting. No. He was just a product of the chaotic setting that he was in. Could he have made different choices? Yes, obviously. Everyone on this show could make different choices, but they didn't, and that's why they're on this show. So we don't know a ton about his social life, but it is believed, based on his other behaviors, that he most likely struggled to form any kind of deep relationship. I mean, he grew up in an environment that trust was a little lacking. Like I mentioned before, he did not trust any kind of authority figure. He probably was a little too aggressive, and that made him more feared, and people avoided him instead of wanting to be close to him. I mean, I don't know why that might be. If you're a violent person, why wouldn't people want to get close to you? That makes no sense. Being sarcastic. Anyways, it's most likely that he associated with other people or delinquent youth like himself that just didn't connect deeply, but they also had violent streaks themselves. So there's no evidence that he had any kind of meaningful relationships or supportive friendships or anything like that. Instead, his social world was likely very fragmented and unstable, just like his family. Like all of the family life he grew up with, that just continued on with all of his other relationships. And they were probably based more on proximity, like they were near each other, than actual trust. Like, hey, you live here, I live here, I guess we'll have to be friends, kind of thing. Now, on to his teen years. His teen years, this is where it gets a little crazy, because his teen years were pure chaos. Pedro was small. He was a very small teenager, but he was fearless. He was very quick-tempered, and he already carried grudges like trophies. Like, he was very proud of all the grudges that he held. He felt the world owed him something, like he deserved something more than what the world was giving him. And anyone who crossed him, or he could cross anyone and he didn't care. Anyone was fair game for him. Like, you could cross him or he could cross you and he didn't care. Everyone was fair game in his eyes. Now, little did anyone know that this angry farm kid was on the verge of becoming one of Brazil's most prolific killers, but only of people he decided deserved it. So he would become judge, jury, and executioner. So that's coming later, though. That's a spoiler. Sorry, spoiler alert. He later said that his first urge to kill actually hit him at 13 years old during a fight with an older cousin. The cousin had punched him, and Pedro just snapped and yelled, "I am going to kill you," and shoved the kid into a running sugarcane press that almost ripped his arm off. Then he pulled a knife, and the only reason why he did not kill his cousin was because the family pulled him off just in time. So this is his first attempted murder, and it's pretty intense. Trying to shove his cousin into a sugarcane press, and then just in case pulling a knife in case the sugarcane press didn't do the job. It's wild. That was his first. He just snapped. That shows you the rage that is inside of this individual. So by the time he reached his early teens, Pedro had already developed several dangerous patterns. He had very, very black and white thinking. So people were either guilty or deserved punishment, or they were innocent. Like, there was no nuance. There was no, well, let's consider what they felt or think or whatever. That did not exist for him. And justification of violence as a solution was one of his traits. He could justify violence for basically anything. Violence was a solution to everything for him. He was very emotionally detached from victims, so he could hurt people or cause pain or whatever. He didn't care. He had no empathy at all. And he had a growing sense that he was an enforcer of justice, not just a normal person. He knew what was just, no one else did, and he would be the one to enforce it. That is what he thought. That is what he felt. So this is really critical because when he commits his first murder at age 14, by the way, so not much longer after he tried to kill his cousin. So he commits his first murder at 14 in 1968. He actually didn't see it as something wrong. He didn't think he did anything wrong. And we'll get to this murder in a second. It's wild. Anyways, he saw killing as necessary, is what I'm trying to say. He thought this was very important and it was okay to do. Now, what made Pedro different from other kids who were raised in these violent environments is how he actually internalized that environment. He didn't just witness violence, he actually adopted it as his identity. So there are lots of people in this world that experience violence, and they don't become serial killers. Pedro took the violence and really absorbed it and made it become his identity. So by the time he reached adolescence, the line between justice and revenge was gone. Absolutely gone. He knew, like I said, he was judge, jury, and executioner at this point, 14 years old, okay? So, like I said, at just 14 years old in 1968, Pedro committed his first murder. Now, here is the story of his first murder. So Pedro's father worked as a security guard at a local municipal school in the small town of Santa Rita do Sapucia. It's an area in Brazil, and some accounts mention that it was in a nearby city. It wasn't in Santa Rita, but most sources say that it's in Santa Rita. So We're going to go with that. Now, his father, like I said, worked as a security guard, but he was accused of stealing food from the school kitchen. So they were accusing him of stealing meals that were meant for the students. And he was fired and reportedly jailed as a result of this. Now, Pedro, who was fiercely loyal to his family, despite all of the abuse he had endured from his father, he was very loyal to his father. Keep that in mind for later. P.S. But he was fiercely loyal to his family and became convinced that the accusation was unfair and that his father had been framed. So he has decided that an injustice has occurred and he needs to make it right, okay? So Pedro interpreted this as authority figures were corrupt and justice had to be taken personally. So he was going to fix the problem. And this belief system literally became the foundation of all of his killings. So this idea of justice for wrongdoings. So let's go back to the story. So after his dad loses his job as being a security guard, Pedro goes and grabs his grandfather's shotgun, marches to City Hall, and blasts the deputy mayor right in front of everyone. The deputy mayor. He kills the deputy mayor in front of everyone, in front of the building, in public view. But I'm sure you're thinking, why on earth would he kill the deputy mayor of all people? What does he have to do with his father being a security guard at a school? Well, Pedro blamed the deputy mayor for ordering or approving his father's firing and imprisonment. Pedro saw that it was a direct revenge for justice for his family because he believed this was the man responsible for approving his dad's firing and jailing. Now, this was a very bold daytime act in a small town, which immediately made him a fugitive. I mean, killing the deputy mayor, yeah, that would do that. So he had to flee. So about a month or so later, Pedro actually tracked down and shot the school security guard, or the daytime watchman, whom he believed was the actual thief who had framed his father. So he killed another person a month later because he realized, you know what? That actually wasn't the person. I killed the wrong guy. Whoopsie. My bad. Oopsie doopsie. I need to go kill the right guy. So he tracked down the other security guard who had actually framed his father and shot him. He used the same shotgun he had used to kill the deputy mayor, and boom, 2 dead before he can grow a proper mustache. Yep, 14 years old. He's already killed 2 people. Now, in Pedro's narrative, this completed his quote-unquote justice for the family wrong. And he viewed both victims as guilty parties in a system that had failed his father. Now, Pedro fled the area right after the killings because now he's a fugitive. And he headed to São Paulo, the São Paulo region, where he began robbing and, ironically, the places he was robbing were actually drug dens. So there's that. And he specifically targeted dealers, and this marked a pattern for him of only killing people he labeled as criminals or scum. So he thought, okay, these guys are drug dealers, so I'm just going to steal from them because they're bad guys anyways. Now, this double homicide at such a young age really set the tone for Pedro's entire life. He was a vigilante-style justice killer against anyone he saw as harming the innocent or crossing him or his family. It was very impulsive, it was public, and rooted in the perceived loyalty and revenge rather than a random thrill, which is, well, he claims that anyways. That's his telling. But that is a difference between a lot of the other serial killers that we've talked about, because a lot of the other serial killers were either motivated by financial gain that they would get from killing the people, or they got special feelings from killing people, which we're not going to get into, but you know what I'm talking about. We've talked about enough serial killers. You know what I'm talking about. But his motivation was literally just revenge or justice. He claimed that he never got the thrill from it, according to him. So now these 2 shotgun murders at 14 are what most places or most sources that I checked considered the launching point of his criminal career. Even though he later claimed dozens more killings, including drug dealers and years later his own father in prison, which we will talk about in a little bit. But ironically, he actually discovered later that the deputy mayor was innocent. But like I said, he went and killed the real culprit. But he found out much later that the deputy mayor literally had nothing to do with it. And he was just like, oh, whoopsie, my bad. So, yeah. Anyways, just think about this. He committed 2 murders at age 14. It wasn't impulsive rage. It was calculated revenge. And like I mentioned, this is only the beginning. 14 years old, okay? So, like I said, he fled to Sao Paulo, where he actually had some godparents that he could stay with. So after fleeing his hometown, Pedro moved into a life of crime. So he became involved with criminal groups, which is ironic because he wanted to kill the bad guys, but he got involved with criminals anyways. And he lived on the run. He robbed, killed, and survived however he could. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, because he wants to be the good guy killing all the bad guys, who did he rob? And I kind of already mentioned this, but he was robbing drug dens and executing dealers. Obviously, that's going to be great. And I mention this again because it's important to this next part of the story. And this, my dear friends, is where our story takes a romantic turn. So this is where Pedro meets the young love of his life. And he meets... Sorry, my brain just turned off for a second. Guys, having a baby that only gets like 4 hours of sleep a night is rough. All right, back to the story. Sorry, my brain turned off for a second there. So this is where he meets the love of his short, young life. So Maria Aprecienda Olympia, or Botina, is what they called her, which actually translates to little boot. It's basically slang for a shapely, attractive woman, often implying that she has a nice booty. So Botina was the girl that he fell in love with, which happened to be a local drug lord's widow. So now remember, he is 14 at this time, and she was reportedly older, much older than the teenage Pedro. Some accounts suggest that she was considerably older, though we don't actually have her exact age. So they quickly moved in together, and she was soon pregnant with his child. And Pedro essentially stepped into her late husband's role in the local drug scene. So he took over that empire, and he took over illicit duties, which soon forced him into more violence. And he even admitted to killing 3 ex-associates / rivals of her dead husband's early on in their relationship. Now, after they got together, it became kind of a period of peace. One of the very few periods of peace in his life. And he claimed to have slowed or paused his killings temporarily because of the relationship with Botina. But remember who he was robbing and killing: the drug dens and other gangs. And at this point, a rival gang leader wanted to get revenge on Pedro, because that's kind of what happens in these scenarios. No one's just kind of forgiving and live and let live. No. They also wanted revenge on Pedro. So, being Pedro's romantic partner made Botina a primary target for these rival gangs. And I am guessing you already know where this is going. So, Botina was murdered while she was pregnant. It was a targeted revenge attack as retaliation for killings Pedro had carried out against a rival drug dealer or gang members. There are some conflicting stories on exactly what happened to her. Some say that it was a rival street gang, but others say she was executed by police during an operation. And others say Pedro found her shot when he returned home. Now, it's possible that both police and the rival gang theories were true, because there was massive corruption in Brazil in the 1970s, especially tied to drug trafficking. So it could have been a rival gang that told the police to take her out. But we don't know for sure what happened to her. But she was shot to death, and the baby died along with her, never being born. Now, her murder devastated Pedro and triggered one of his most infamous accelerations. He went on a targeted revenge spree, which in a way makes sense. He didn't connect with a lot of people, and they just took out the one person who he connected with, including his own child. The people he cared about were killed, so I can see why he would want revenge. Like, he literally had her name on his arm next to the phrase, "Sou capaz de matar por amor," which I know I probably didn't say that really well, but it translates to, "I am capable of killing for love." So, yeah, it makes sense that he would go on a rampage. So, after her death, it is often cited as a turning point that solidified Pedro's vigilante persona, and he positioned himself as only killing those people who deserved it. So he hunted down everyone he believed was connected to her killing. The climax of his revenge was when he committed a massacre at a wedding hosted by a rival gang leader. Pedro goes in there and goes nuclear. He and his crew crashed a wedding that the rival gang was throwing, and massacre style, 7 people died, including the gang boss, quote unquote China, his name was China, who takes a shotgun blast right to the chest, and then 16 more people were wounded. And then he continued tracking and eliminating remaining targets often with torture and extreme violence. He even shoots the boyfriend of his favorite cousin just for getting her pregnant without marrying her, showing you his pattern of honor/revenge killings. So he really believed that he was in the right. Now, this wave of violence, roughly ages 14 through 18. Yeah, he's a 14 to 18-year-old child while he does all of this. Contributed heavily to his early body count and notoriety before his first major arrest, which happened at the age of 18. And I am shocked it took 4 years for him to get arrested, to be honest, because he was killing so many people. Like, how did they not catch him before this? I'm guessing the wedding probably was the biggest, like, oh, maybe we should take this guy in moment. But who knows? Like I mentioned, the police were pretty corrupt in Brazil at this time. So who knows why it took so long? Anyways, he was captured and arrested on May 24th, 1973. And like I said, he was 18, finally cornered after his killing spree. The police arrest him, but even on the ride to jail, this part is so crazy. On the ride to jail, he can't stop. They handcuffed him to a rapist on their way to jail. And Pedro turns and kills the rapist right there in the police car. Yeah, he literally murdered someone while he was sitting in the backseat of a police car. This man has some cojones. Like, seriously, he genuinely thought he was justice. Then, the ultimate betrayal, which is super crazy, happens to him. He finds out that his father is currently in prison, so Pedro himself is still in prison at this point. He finds out that his father is now in prison for hacking his mother to death with a machete. Now, remember a little while back I said that Pedro was super loyal to his father despite the abuse? Hence why this is such a huge betrayal. His father kills his mother, and he killed her with 21 blows of the machete. His poor mother, suffered all this abuse and then was murdered by her husband. By the time Pedro found out, he was already locked away in prison, but this did not stop Pedro from getting his revenge. He arranges a visit with his father. Okay, just imagine this. They are bringing the two inmates in together. His father thinks that he's having a great reunion with his son, but Pedro ends up stabbing his dear old dad 22 times. And then he supposedly carved out his heart. This is where it gets really nasty. Takes a bite and spits it back onto his father's body. Okay, he is in prison while he's doing this. Where are the prison guards? What is happening in Brazil? What is happening in the Brazilian prisons? Honestly, cuts out his dad's heart, takes a bite, spits it back out. And Pedro said of this incident that he, quote, stabbed my mother 21 times. So I stabbed him 22. Yeah, and he did this while he was in prison. Apparently, prison is less strict down in Brazil and you can just do whatever you want in there, I guess. Now, Pedro continued killing throughout his life, both outside and inside prison. So, in prison, he became even more dangerous. He started targeting other inmates, especially those convicted of rape or crimes against children, which I don't mind so much. This is I never condoned killing anyone, but to target those specific demographics, yeah, I mean, I could see why you would want to do that. Because those people are freaking evil, so I can see why he did it. I do not condone murdering anyone, but if you're going to choose a population, I guess that's a good one. He claimed he was cleaning up the prison system. Pedro even got a tattoo that read, "Mato por prazer," I kill for pleasure. Though he always insisted it was revenge and justice, and never random. He never killed anyone random. He claims he never touched an innocent person, except for, the deputy mayor that he killed. That was an innocent person, but we're going to ignore that for his sake. Anyways, but this was all based on his point of view and who he thought was guilty, not necessarily the reality of the situation. Again, Deputy Mayor was completely innocent, but he thought he was justified. Now, we know that he killed at least 47 inmates and while he was in prison, but what was his total victim count? Well, he claimed that there were over 100 people that he killed. Some people estimate it is even higher than that. So legal issues really start piling up for Pedro at this time. But Brazil's chaotic system couldn't keep up with this one-man death squad. He just kept killing all the other inmates. So he goes on trial for a mountain of bodies at this point. And the judge hits him with a 126-year sentence that later ballooned to 400 plus years because he just kept killing people inside the prisons. Like I said, he killed officially 47 inmates. Like, seriously, what is going on in these Brazilian prisons? How could they not stop him? Like, there's got to be something you could do. Anyways, like I said, many of his victims, the other inmates that he killed, were rapists, gang members, and people who did horrible things to children. And he decided they needed to be removed. So, yeah. Another story, he even decapitated one guy, killed a cellmate for snoring too loudly, and survived an ambush by slaughtering 3 attackers. 3 guys ambushed him in jail, and he killed all 3 of them. Yeah. Psychiatrists called him the perfect psychopath. Brilliant memory, ice-cold emotions, and he had 0 remorse for quote-unquote bad people. So, yeah. This guy is crazy. Like, he killed 3 people at once. Like, oh man, this guy's nuts. But despite all of his killings, get this, Brazilian law caps sentences at 30 years. Because remember, the judge sentenced him to 400 plus years in prison. But the Brazilian law only lets them serve 30 years. It later goes up to 40 years, but like I said, the judge gave him 400 years, but he's only going to serve 30, which is insane for someone who was constantly killing people. So in April 2007, he walked free after only serving 34 years in jail. He was rearrested in 2011 for being involved in prison riots and holding hostages inside the prison. So there's that. Again, though, he only serves another 8 years. But actually, I take that back. He was sentenced to 8 years, but he served 7 and gets out early on good behavior. Being released again December of 2018. Yeah. Now, I know this whole story has been wild. there's so many twists and turns. I know you can't keep up, but here's another fun twist. He eventually becomes a public figure, starting a YouTube channel where he talks about his crimes and his past. He becomes a YouTube star. Bet you didn't see that one coming. Yep, I didn't either. I was going to look up some of his videos, but I ran out of time. But he became a YouTube star. But don't worry. I know you were worried about this. But his story doesn't end peacefully. So on March 5th, 2023, so not that long ago, just about 3 years ago, at age 68, he was outside a relative's house in Mogi das Cruces. It's the same city where he started all of his big killing sprees. He got attacked. So the attack occurred around 10 a.m. in the neighborhood in front of his relative's house. Accounts mention his sister or another family member. We're not actually sure whose family member's house he was in front of. He was just at a family member's house. And Pedro was just sitting on a chair on the sidewalk or on the porch area when suddenly a black car pulled up to the house. 2 or 3 hooded masked assailants got out of the car, and they were all wearing masks, all of them. Some accounts say that they were even wearing Joker masks. Like, if you've seen the Batman movies, the Joker masks that they wear, some people think that that's what they were wearing. Pedro was actually holding a small child, a relative of his, in his arms, like sitting on his lap when the attackers approached. The child was safely removed when one of the men told the family members present, "It's nothing to do with you. Take your daughter/child and go inside." So they were able to take the baby, I don't know if it was a baby, take the child into the house. And once the child was gone, the gunman opened fire with a 9mm pistol, hitting Pedro 4 to 6 times in the mouth, abdomen, back, and left armpit. He then fell to the ground, and one assailant approached and delivered the coup de grace, which was a deep slash to the throat with a kitchen knife. Yeah, a kitchen knife. Yikes. Nearly decapitating Pedro. Some reports describe it as a stabbing to the throat, followed by a cutting. Either way, it wasn't pretty. It was gross and gruesome. Pedro died at the scene. Emergency services were called, but there was no way to revive him. They couldn't figure out who actually had done it, and investigators believe it was a revenge killing, which is ironic. You know, he died the way he lived, by revenge killing. Now, given his past, there were lots of people who may have wanted him dead, so it would not be surprising that this would be the way he would go out. So, what impact did Pedro have on? So, Pedro forced Brazil and the world to ask, can a serial killer be a vigilante hero? Because he was killing some people that I consider the most degenerate in society, you know, child abuser, rapists, all of those kinds of people. Some cops reportedly shook his hand on the street when they saw him. Parents showed his YouTube videos to scare kids straight. Yikes. So, I mean, I guess his YouTube videos were impactful. I don't know if it was in the way that he was wanting, but I guess it works. Now, he directly inspired Jeff Lindsay's Dexter novels and the hit TV series. So like I said, this should remind you of Dexter because it did inspire them. He became Brazil's Dexter and South American Punisher. After his final release, he ran a massive YouTube channel, like I said, that had 242,000 subscribers and millions of views. He ranted against gangs and would tell true crime stories and preached crimes ruin lives. Shocker. Who would have guessed that? He called himself reformed right up until someone reformed him permanently. So, up until the day he died, he claimed that he was now reformed. Now, the big myth when it comes to Pedro is the heart-eating story. So, Pedro loved to tell that story. That's a story that he actually told. But one biographer actually claimed that Pedro's dad died of a respiratory disease years later, and Pedro never killed him. But Pedro stuck to his version even until he died. Like, he claimed that he was the one that killed his father. So, who knows if that story's really legitimately true? We'll say it is since Pedro said it, but who knows? So, that is the story of Pedro Rodrigues Filho. It remains one of the most fascinating and terrifying figures in true crime, especially from Brazil. And he is our horrible human in history for today. So, thank you guys so much for tuning in and having patience with me, taking a while to get episodes out, but hopefully things will calm down soon. But thank you so much. And if you like these stories, be sure you're liking and subscribing and sharing this. I would love to grow this channel. I know I said I do this for funsies, and I do it for funsies, but I would love to share these stories with more people. So if you guys can help me grow the audience, that would be amazing. So make sure you're sharing this. Turn on notifications because, like I said, life gets crazy and you want to get notified when I post more episodes. So make sure you turn those on. Again, thanks to Ethan Ackerman for this week's suggestion. It was fantastic. What a great story. I had no idea this guy existed. And that's why I want you guys to send me any suggestions that you might have, because if you know of someone you want more information about, please let me know, because I want to talk about who you guys want to hear about. And speaking of, we do have another listener request that we're going to do next week. Like I said, I've got a list of them, so we're going through them one at a time. If you've sent me a request, I still got you, and I will be doing it soon. But we have another one next week, which shout out to Jason for this one. We are going to talk about a man that most people have only heard about in a Bible story, a very specific Bible story, and a very popular Bible story. But do you know the true story of Herod the Great? You've heard his name, and you've heard the atrocity that he committed against a bunch of newborn babies, but do you actually know his real story? You will if you tune in next week, because that is who we are going to talk about, Herod the Great. So we will see you guys next week on Horrible Humans in History, and thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you later.